Please. Yeah, por favor. Is James around? Well, he can come up when he's in the room. Okay. So, the International Indigenous Working Group. We have a research subcommittee with that has 6 or 7 of our leaders of IGWA, and the leaders were having a discussion about what kind of research do we need to do. Because we actually don't have our own research department, we need to partner with other research units, preferably around the world, to help us partner to do research, and then we get an appropriate academic to join us on our research team and then go ahead. So in this case, for this particular research study, we partnered with the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network and the AHA Center, the AHA Research Center in Ottawa. Halifax on the east coast of Canada. You know, we've been asking for research on Indigenous people, especially aggregated epidemiological data, which there's not very much of it around the world. But when we see the data, it's very enlightening and helps us to know our epidemic and know where to target our interventions for HIV, our HIV response. But you know, a lot of Indigenous people have had bad experiences with research. We've had forced sterilization, we've been injected with STIs without our knowledge and followed for decades at a time. There are times when our blood samples have been taken and put into a library, and Indigenous blood has been researched without our permission to do genetic studies, etc. So we realized that we wanted to create something globally so that we could create the cornerstone, an ethical cornerstone on which to build our research in going forward for the next 5, 10, 20 years. So that's what this research was about, is to develop a research protocol. I would like you to refer to this document as we're going through the presentation, Conducting Research on HIV among Indigenous Peoples, Values, Approaches, and Guidelines. And that would be in your conference bag. The conference bags only showed up today, along with our beautiful poster here. Sorry, something happened when you're rushing. But if you look in your conference bag, you'll find this document which we'll be referring to. And I'd like to introduce Renée, who's been our research goddess for 5 or 6 years now. And please welcome Renée Masching from Canada.
Thanks, Trevor. And so I'm actually going to walk you through the document. So you're welcome to look at it or just listen to me. So we named this session Conducting HIV Research. It reflects the title of the project. But before we came to our values, approaches, and guidelines, we began with an approach to sowing seeds, to planting ideas and approaches to research, to build a foundation for international research excellence, to reduce HIV disparities among Indigenous populations. That was slow for me. And this project was funded by the Canadian Institute of Health Research. And so to begin a presentation in a good way, I want to acknowledge the place that we're meeting, the beautiful welcome that we received from the Standing Nation, and to recognize that we've been told this is also the traditional territory of the Roma for the travelers, and to be thankful for the opportunity to be here, and to gently leave our footsteps as we walk in this place. Now, because this is my presentation, I get to put a picture of the people who keep my home fire up on the screen. My sons and my husband. I didn't have any pictures of the dogs and the cat. But I just want to invite all of you to also Think of those people who you love, two-legged or four-legged, or otherwise, who help take care of you, who are tending your home fire now, and who are looking forward to your return, and who make it possible for you to be part of this work, and to send some appreciation and thanks to those loved ones. Now, in our teachings and the work that we do in Canada, it's important to give you an idea of who I am and where I'm coming from. And this is offered with humility and to help you to bring some context to what I might be offering. You can measure what you think you're hearing when you know a bit more about who I am. So I'm First Nation descent. I was adopted as a baby. My bloodlines are from the Cayuga Nation, the Six Nations of the Grand River, in southern Ontario, or central Canada, for those of you from outside of the country. I grew up in a family with a mother of Western European descent, and a father who was a first-generation Canadian, Eastern European descent. And my illegitimate father was an immigrant to Canada. My academic training is in social work, and my community and cultural training I want to acknowledge and honor has been through participation in ceremony with the Mi'kmaq Nation on the east coast of Canada. I'm also a mother, a sister, and an auntie. Many other things, but I want to share those parts of myself with you today. Okay, so when we began to do this work, when we talk about work in the Indigenous community, we want to demonstrate working in a good way, as well as explain it. So I'm going to start with acknowledging our team. There are many ways that research teams are built. There are many titles and layers. There are forms that we fill out that dictate what type of role you might be given officially. So we created a research team, as Trevor said, working with the IGLA Research Subcommittee, and engaged our international leaders, engaged with friends in Canada. Dr. Alexander King is a physician and researcher in Canada who joined us in this work. We partnered with good friends who do international work with ICAD and who have done a lot of research work, and invited Shana and Robbie to join us to help guide our work. We recruited staff members who were part-time and probably worked far more than we actually paid them for, and reached out trying to find staff, one in Canada, one in Peru, who were bilingual, to help us to overcome the challenges that might happen when you need interpretation. So at least our staff would be able to work together and continue to move the work forward. And we would avoid always working in English and unintentionally, or due to lack of funding, privileging English literature and English communication. So the way that we want to do this international work, we want to be very mindful to learn from the issues and barriers that we may have faced in the past and building approaches to address that. And when we came together and doing our work, we also had support from our brother Roberto, and Malcolm King joined us and to help to review our documents, see if we were out for lunch. And so I want to honor that all of these people have done a tremendous amount of work to help us to come to this place. And Trevor has offered some of this background already, some of our process, that in working with IGLA, in my role as a technician, as a support, somebody who admires the work of IGLA and is happy to contribute whenever I can, we began by suggesting the possibility, the idea, that perhaps before IGLA can work together on an epi research project, we need to understand how we want to work together with research. What are our values? What are the ways that we imagined research could unfold. And to be clear about that, because as we started to talk about research, we realized that we were on different pages sometimes. So we had approval from ICWA, we wrote a proposal to the funder, our team began to do work when we got the good news, we tried to recruit staff, we learned a lot along the way on this process. Our responsibility was to report back to the subcommittee to make sure that our leaders were informed. And then when the subcommittee was pleased, to report back to the full ICWA. And throughout this process, using Google Translate, with apologies for the quality of Google Translate, and trying to decide when we could pay to translate a draft document so that we could share it respectfully, recognizing that there was only so much money in that budget. And so, a dance, always, about balancing respect with a fiscal reality. Very uncomfortable place to be at times. And so, with our values, approaches, and guidelines, we set out to develop a protocol. Protocol. A couple of Spanish words that I've learned. And we really started by walking the path that we were proposing, about being intentional about the way we were approaching this little research project that would help us to plant the seeds, to sow the seeds for future work. So we invested in building our relationships. The Canadians did traveling this time and had the incredible honor and privilege to be hosted in Guatemala. We shared worldviews. We had to be trusting with each other. We had to be patient. If you can imagine a 10-foot tall whiteboard with English and Spanish speakers trying to illustrate with words, with symbols, with circles and lines, what we were talking about, and overcome the barriers to translation. And we approached all of this with a purpose, as you'll see in your document, to make a humble offering to ICWA, to hope to guide the work of the working group, to be able to say this is our agreement about how we'll be able to go forward with research, and to hope that it may also be useful beyond the scope of ICWA. And of course, as we talk about research, as Trevor said, it's long history. And so we came up with both values, frameworks, principles, what must be in your heart to do research work well, and also approaches. So our core values, which are described in the report, so I'll just highlight them for you here, were Indigenous community participation in all stages of research, and in identifying the research questions. Respecting the diversity of the Indigenous community. A lot of the work that CAAN does, my organization, is national in scope. And we have to be very careful and thoughtful about what it means to gather information and approach work in Halifax versus what it might mean to gather and collect information in the prairies, in the middle of Canada, or what it might mean on the West Coast or the North. So even in our research design, we have to include flexibility. We want to be sure that we were mindful of and respectful of and intentional about paying attention to Indigenous ways of knowing. And the multiple ways of knowing, not just through textbooks, not just through publications, through dreams, through visions, from the medicines, and from the relationships that we build. Respecting self-determination and the principle of self-determination. To be sure that we reflect ownership, access, and use of all the research data, all the research materials, and to be absolutely certain that the research we're developing and designing, that our intent from the outset, as we talk about our idea, is to benefit and have a positive impact on the community. And so then we thought about, well, then what does it mean when you actually sit down to write the proposal? When you begin to say, this is how we're going to do the research work. So again, self-determination and inclusion in all stages, not just the value, but also entrenched in the way that we design, intentionally design our research, so we're thoughtful about how we put places of decision-making and recognize how that work is going to unfold. But we must act in good faith, buena fe. We must reflect what in Canada we might say is work in a good way, and be pure of heart and intention in our work. Paying attention to the Indigenous determinants of health, recognizing the history and ongoing impact of colonization, recognizing the factors and context that influence Indigenous health, and being mindful of that research. being culturally grounded in the way we design our research, including ceremony, and looking for the solutions that come from the culture as well. Again, being locally driven, paying attention to the teachings and the processes and the protocols for an international project, for example. But how we work in Canada might be different from how we work in Mexico, or in Australia, or in Peru. And to be open to and responsive to doing the very best we can for our community. And that community, the working together with Indigenous and Western ways of knowing. And taking the very best of the research process to do the very best we can for the people we care and work with them. Now, we were very excited about creating protocol. And of course, we had lots of ideas about how to do the work as well. So we had to stop ourselves as we developed this document and get ready for a part 2, for the next steps, for the actual implementation. So the next funding proposal, the next money we need to find, is to pull together all the resources we found in literature, examples from interviews, examples from our own experiences, the experiences of the IPA leadership, and produce another document, another resource that will offer more suggestions and more content. We slowed ourselves down with the protocol in order to present a short, clear document and then imagine step 2. Gracias.
Our next contestant, I'd like to introduce my very good friend from Peru, Dr. Pilar Montalvo, who is going to tell us a story and give us an example of ethics in research. Please welcome Pilar.
Thank you, Trevor. I have a video. En este video quiero representar todo el trabajo que hemos hecho con una organización nacional de mujeres indígenas. Y representa todo lo que hemos hablado en esa construcción del proyecto Sembrando Semillas. ¿Cómo hacemos? Mientras voy hablando va a ir pasando el video. Entonces, la construcción de un protocolo empieza con todo el componente de qué somos los pueblos indígenas, de dónde venimos los pueblos indígenas, cuáles son nuestros recursos, cómo dialogamos a través de ellos, cómo establecemos nuestros saberes, cómo compartimos nuestros conocimientos, cómo construimos colectivamente en un mundo horizontal.
Okay, so while I'm talking, this video is being shown, and what I want to show is the work that we have done with the association that is fighting for the rights of Indigenous women in Peru. Basically here, when we started with this project, sowing seeds, what you want to do is, when we started with this protocol, we started talking about and showing also who we are. Who are we as Indigenous people? Where do we come from? What kind of resources do we have? How do we use those resources to establish dialogue? How do we share our knowledge, the saber, so what we know as Indigenous people, how do we share that? And how do we construct collectively this horizontal world where we live in.
Y una de las cosas que hemos aprendido en este proceso es que no estamos solo hablando del VIH como un ente solo y único, sino que está relacionado con otros factores, otros determinantes en la vida de los pueblos indígenas. Y también como otras enfermedades, como la tuberculosis, como la hepatitis C, como el SIPA, como las infecciones de transmisión sexual, la mortalidad materna, la mortalidad infantil, la anemia. Entonces, ¿cómo todo eso traemos en conjunto en nuestros diálogos para no quedarnos atrás en la epidemia? No solo ser el punto de problema, sino también la solución.
So, what we've learned in this process is that it's not just about HIV. So there are a lot of other factors which are important, which are related to HIV. And those factors are very important for Indigenous people, for their lives. Such as, for example, tuberculosis, Hep C, Zika, STDs, mortality amongst pregnant mothers or little children, anemia, etc. So basically we included this too in this whole project. And we're not just focusing on the problem, but we're focusing a lot on the solutions.
Y en ese proceso de construcción, de determinar cuáles son esos factores, construimos otro proceso que se llama el intergeneracional. Es decir, se juntaron todas las mujeres sabias de los pueblos indígenas de Perú con las mujeres jóvenes. Porque no solo es un problema de las personas adultas, también es un asunto que toca la vida de los pueblos jóvenes. Entonces, este proceso intergeneracional nos ha ayudado también a incorporar en la población adulta nuevos saberes y formas de ver la vida de los pueblos, de los jóvenes indígenas. Y hacia las mujeres y hacia los jóvenes ha sido importante para conocer de eso que las sabias saben, de eso que hablaban las sabias, de eso que se tenía guardado dentro del contexto interno del cuerpo de las mujeres.
So during this process of constructing something new and about establishing which factors are really determining the situation, we've also established something that's called like between generations. So we organize meetings or gatherings with both the wise elderly women of the villages in Peru together with the young women. And that's very important because it's not just about the problems that adult women are having, and also the young women are having a lot of problems. And I think that this process helped a lot for the integration between the two generations. For instance, the elderly women, they have a better understanding about the young women, what they think, etc. And they learned a lot of new information. But also for the youth, it's important because they understand better what the wisdom is that those elderly women have, what it comes from, so what they've kept inside for so long.
Y otro de los procesos que hemos trabajado es incorporar otras voces no indígenas para ayudarnos como a centrar todos los conocimientos y todos los diálogos y saberes que tuvimos. Como decía Renée, esto ha sido un asunto y es y debe ser un asunto de buena fe. Un asunto que nos ayude a caminar todos juntos, porque separados no vamos a llegar lejos, juntos vamos a llegar mucho más lejos.
And another process is the integration of non-Indigenous voices. And this process helped us really to focus on all the knowledge that is present and the dialogue, communication. And like Renée was saying before, this is really a question of good faith, the buena fe. And so it's very important to walk together, because we can't do it alone, we really have to do it together.
Y bueno, para terminar, una de las cosas que en este proceso de construcción hemos trabajado con las mujeres indígenas de Perú es que hemos podido recoger muchas evidencias, nuestra información, nuestros datos. Y el reto es cómo esa información, esas evidencias son válidas también para las organizaciones internacionales, para los donantes, pero sobre todo para los gobiernos que sepan que esta es nuestra evidencia, esto es nuestro, esto es para el pueblo. Entonces se tiene que trabajar y tomar en cuenta.
So just to finish, during this construction process with the indigenous women in Peru, we've also been able to collect a lot of evidence, our own information, our own data. And now the challenge is how to convey that message of all the evidence collected to the big donors, the NGOs, all the other counterparts, but specifically to the governments. To make them really aware that it is our information, our knowledge, our evidence, and that it is really important, and that they should take it into account when they produce reports, etc.
Este video tiene música, tiene voz, y espero que todos puedan verlo en la aldea global los próximos días, en el stand de los pueblos indígenas. Y espero también que muy pronto podamos tener estas evidencias para poder compartírselas también a los otros pueblos indígenas. Como dije ayer, no solo hemos aprendido de la experiencia de Chile como América Latina, Amaranta también ha sido parte de este proceso porque a través de videoconferencia nos ha ayudado a entender la conceptualización de la diversidad sexual, pero también mi participación en los espacios del Canadá, gracias a CAAN, ayudó a hilar ese proceso también en Perú, y por lo tanto estoy muy agradecida de escuchar las historias de las mujeres canadienses que ayudaron mucho a la construcción de este proceso.
So this video, it comes with a voiceover and some music, and I hope that you'll be able to see it once again with music and voice in the Global Village in the Rye in Amsterdam at our stand of Indigenous people. So I hope that soon all the evidence will be taken into account, and also that we'll be able to show to other communities. And it's not just about the experience of Chile that is included in this project. Also very important is Amaranta. We have done some video Skype sessions, so she's part of this process, and she has taught us a lot on sexual diversity. I'm also very grateful to CAAN. They also helped a lot, and especially they helped to establish relationship and to link several parts during this process. So I'm very happy as well, of course, because of the relationship with CAAN, to have learned and heard a lot about some experiences in Canada. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gracias, Dr. Montalvo. Thank you, Dr. Montalvo. Our next speaker is no stranger to IGLA. In fact, James Ward, Associate Professor James Ward, was a leader of IGLA in 2013 and 2014, and he was also the central focal point for organizing the International Indigenous Pre-Conference in Australia, which I would say was one of our most fabulous fantastic, shiny examples of how good it can be when you have strong local Indigenous partners. So please help me welcome James Ward.
Thanks very much, Trevor. Let me begin by paying my respects to custodians of this land and acknowledge their custodianship of land and law in here, and pay my respects to the Parliament who welcomed us here yesterday. So I guess this morning I'd like to frame research, how it's conducted in Australia, not specifically focused on HIV, but really, in some ways, I think Australia has had a very not very good history between researchers and community, and it continues to happen today. In fact, last year there was a major complaint put in against a doctor in Australia about presenting a poster at the IAS conference in Paris. In fact, what happened with that poster, there was a table, so there was an outbreak of HIV among Aboriginal communities in a specific area in Queensland. And it's okay to report an outbreak, but what was on the poster was a line-listed table of every case that was diagnosed in the outbreak. So it didn't have names, but it did have age, sex, route of transmission, and really it kind of highlights that there is still a lot of work to do in research in Australia. Now, the thing I haven't told you about that poster was that I was an author on that poster, and unbeknownst to me, the table was placed in at the last minute and put and shown at the conference. Some wise Australians made a complaint to an ethics committee in Australia about specifically about the table. But you can imagine if you're a 25-year-old female, which one of the cases was, a 25-year-old female diagnosed, injecting drug use history, viral load at diagnosis, very identifiable at a local level. I was absolutely shocked because I'd seen a draft of the poster, and really as a kind of busy researcher, I hadn't seen the table. The table wasn't in the draft, and I went back and checked all my emails, and I got a research complaint from the ethics committee, just thinking, where the hell did that happen? And really a really bad example of how research is conducted without context and consultation with Aboriginal people in the country. And so that was last year, and so my organisation, I had much evidence to say that I hadn't seen the poster, and I would never put my name on a poster ever again without seeing the final product. You think posters are low risk, really, because you can't really put a lot on a poster except a table with lots of identifying information nowadays. So really, in the Australian context, we're guided by a set of values and ethics described by Aboriginal people. Anybody that conducts research in Aboriginal communities in Australia are guided by the NHMRC Values and Ethics document. And in that document, it highlights a number of issues. Really, there's a lot of focus on consultation, a lot of focus on benefit, a lot of focus on transferability of these findings, a lot of focus on sustainability, and a lot of focus on building capacity within the communities you're working in. And so how that translates at a practical level for a researcher like myself, which has a number of national projects, is that I work for a university, so I'm required to have ethics by my university, but I'm also required in whatever jurisdiction I work in Australia, which there are 8 states and territories. Wherever I work in Australia, if I have one site one group in my study, I'm required to get the jurisdictional Aboriginal Ethics Committee approval from each jurisdiction. And so, so that might seem an onerous process when I have a number of national studies, and I have to get at least 10 Ethics Committee approvals from Aboriginal Human Research Ethics Committees, which very much covers much of what is in this document, which is a very, it's very heartening to see that we're on the right page in Australia. But each of those ethics committees has membership on the committees, which are predominantly made up of Aboriginal elders. And they're the spiritual people, the religious people who are required as part of legislation to be on our committees. So we've got approval for elders, Aboriginal elders, cultural custodians of culture to be the religious person on our committees. So it brings with that, you can imagine, a whole lot of questions, which are sometimes very useful. Most times, I have to say, Aboriginal ethics approvals are very useful. They enhance my project. But there are other times where I think, yeah, what the hell, yeah. So I'll give you an example of a recent study. So I'm conducting right now the second national study of young Aboriginal people in the country around knowledge, risk behaviours and health service access around STIs, HIV. And so in the first study, we collected surveys from around 3,000 people. The second study, we're hoping to collect the same amount to monitor trends in knowledge, risk behaviour and health service access. So all committees approved the study with some tweaks here and there. But one of the most obscure questions I got from somebody on an ethics committee, in the Aboriginal Ethics Committee the other week, was one of the questions are you sexually active? At what age did you become sexually active? Went through every other ethics committee except this one, which said, why are you not asking people who are not sexually active why they're not sexually active? You can imagine that must raise a whole lot of issues for people who are not sexually active. Maybe they've never been drunk. Maybe maybe they've never found the right partner. Maybe they want to keep a virgin until marriage. But they're very difficult questions for people to answer in a survey. So it does bring with it some complexity, having people who are not clear about research protocols. So we answered the question and we've got it approved now, but we didn't change our question. So, but it does raise some issues. But I think on the whole, our Aboriginal Human Research Ethics Committees enhance our processes and really pick up issues that the university that I work for, who are supposed to cover me with ethics approval, who have a glance at it and would never understand our context. Our ethics committees really, I can go ahead safely and say that we're good. The questions are great, the feasibility of conducting this, the suitability of this research is good, and that we're on the right path to getting some good outcomes for our community. The other thing I'd say about our research guidelines in Australia are that there's a real focus on making sure that the research is translated back to community, that the knowledge we gain is given back to communities. And so a large focus of my research is to translate our research findings not only to policy, but to community. And so we have a whole range of websites. We've got about 4 different social media pages, all focused on feeding back our research findings. So I think that's very important for us, and I'm sure that's the case globally around the world. There's 2 important conversations that are happening in Australia right now, and I know that there are conversations globally about these 2 issues. But I think it's a really important one. One is we're calling it Indigenous data sovereignty in Australia. And Indigenous data sovereignty is really about breaking down data for our peoples by tribe, clan, group. Because what happens at a national level is that research often masks success in some communities. And so for us, there's been a really big conversation about, for me, I belong to the Pitjantjatjara and Narungga clans. For me, I would love to see research conducted Pitjantjatjara against Narungga, or Narungga against Yuin, or Narungga against Nagara. So I'd love to see our research pitched against each other, to see how well we're going against each other. This issue about data sovereignty is that it's Aboriginal pitched against non-Aboriginal all the time. And as a quantitative researcher, it's oranges and apples. It does not take into account the context of colonisation, discrimination, and all the other issues that come with our outcomes in health. So really important, Indigenous data sovereignty. And I think we're moving on a very nice path now. Many years, like yesterday I said about the $4.4 billion that have been invested in Indigenous affairs in Australia. For many years now, we're not on track to meet any of the targets, the 10 targets in the Close the Gap. But there are many communities who are on track. And so at that national level, we're hiding success. And the closely related one is about this data deficit discourse that occurs in Indigenous peoples all the time. It reduces us, this deficit narrative about us, homogenises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia, and it essentialises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia about us as a people who have failed. And I think we have to be very careful about changing our discourse in research findings to a more strength-based approach and not so much the deficit discourse. Now, as a researcher, I'm conflicted because as a researcher that's in the government, not working in government, but that is at government tables all the time, trying to get them to do something, the deficit discourse is only the way policy is rolled out. And so what it does, it frames us in the negative all the time, and government can't think, well, we've only got 10% of people with STIs, not 90% who don't. They want to fix a problem with government policy. And so it's really this, I need to maintain a deficit discourse when I talk to government, but a strength-based approach for our community to make sure that our communities don't see the problem as too overwhelming. Because the issues, I think, are very much compounded year after year. I constantly hate it. I hate going to an Aboriginal health research conference because it's all framed in the negative. And I think those two issues, data sovereignty and data deficit discourse versus a strength-based approach, is really what we're on about right now in Australia. And I commend IGWA for the protocol around HIV research.
Okay, so we're talking about ethical approaches to research with Indigenous peoples, and we've had an overview of the document that IGWA and the Research Committee and the CAAN Research Center has come up with as a humble offering to the world. We've heard examples from Peru and Australia on ethics around research with Indigenous peoples, especially in the light of partnerships, because that's really what this is about, building bridges. I want to open up for questions, and we're only going to have it for 10 minutes because we need to let the interpreters take a break. Interpretation is very difficult. You have to think in two languages at the same time, and your brain needs rest. we have to be respectful to our interpreters because it's a very difficult job. And it takes a professional. We hired some very high-powered professionals for our contest. So please, are there any questions for our panelists, either on the protocol itself or some of the examples you've heard? Sean, please.
My question.
On and off.
Yeah. My question is about, so I sit on a research ethics board in Toronto, and one of the issues that we continue to come across is that we have master's degrees are moving towards 1-year programs across North America. So we're getting students in and students out within 12 months. And so we're seeing more and more protocols coming forward from master's students who are interested in doing Indigenous research in less than 12 months. And so my question is, because I get a lot of pushback when I say, you know, you can't consult community, you can't do research, you can't do what you need to do in less than 12 months. And I'm just interested in your take, because I get a lot of pushback on this, because we have to let students do research in order to get their degrees. And so what are your thoughts on moving to these 1-year intensive programs, and can you really do good research in a good way in that timeline?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a responsibility as researchers to build a future generation of researchers. But I have many students that come to our program trying to do the same thing, but in 2 years. And 2 years is even too small to conduct student projects. So really, I try and find projects that are already up and running and that meet the requirements of students, so they don't have to start consultations from scratch, and they can take size out a small chunk of existing research projects. It's really difficult, and they're not going to be a Lancet publication or a New England journal. But we've got a responsibility, but we've also got a responsibility to our communities, not to let students out there without any expertise or experience, or their first time ever meeting Aboriginal people, First Nations people, getting their interpretation on it, which is really quite skewed. So it's really, I think at an ethics committee, I think we really should be saying to the supervisors, that this is probably not a feasible project, and it's probably likely to do more harm than good, particularly if it's too ambitious in its approach. So.
You guys? You okay?
¿Cuáles son las estrategias que han pensado o que han experimentado hasta ahora sobre cómo divulgar la información que se genera y en qué niveles? ¿No? ¿Es el nivel del tomador de decisión gubernamental? ¿Es el que financia la investigación? Y es la comunidad la que necesita. ¿Está considerado en estos protocolos que han hecho estos niveles de divulgación de información? ¿O dónde están estos vacíos? Si hay vacíos para poder asegurarnos que esa información que se genera, las investigaciones que se generen, la comunidad sea la más beneficiada en eso. Pero la forma en que se escribe, la forma en que se presenta el reporte final, no necesariamente la comunidad lo interpreta. Una vez tenido ya la investigación, ¿cómo trasladarlo a que la comunidad acceda, interprete y lo haga suyo?
So my question would be, my question would be, what strategies are that you have thought about, or that you have even had experiences with, about how to basically make sure that the information goes away, how to distribute information, to what level, because you talked about the government decision, that it's basically the government who decides what to finance and where, but it's basically the community itself that needs the investigation or the money, right? So has this been studied at all? And if not, how can we make sure that it's, in the end, the community that really benefits from all of this? Because, as you very correctly said, the final reports or final studies do not always go to the community. And sometimes I have the impression that we need a separate study, basically, to find out how to best translate the results of the study towards, or to, or in the community itself.
And this will be our final question, because we need to go eat lunch, so I want to give our interpreters a break, please.
Uno de los, de hecho, Amaranta, uno de los puntos de discusión cuando estuvimos haciendo la construcción del protocolo, de este proceso que contó Renée, es, nos preguntamos muchas veces, ¿para qué sirve la investigación? ¿Para quién va a beneficiar la investigación? ¿Qué vamos a hacer y qué vamos a obtener con esta investigación? Eso ha sido un proceso de preguntas y respuestas, de análisis, de sueños, y en realidad estas investigaciones en los pueblos indígenas pueden beneficiar a muchos. Debería beneficiar a la comunidad, porque esto permite hacer cambios a nivel de políticas.
¿Cómo?
Ok. Se beneficia a la persona que hace la investigación, del estudiante también, porque conoce y puede intervenir. El cómo viene y justo a tomar el tema de lo que habla la consulta. Quien debería decir cómo debería ser la comunidad. Bajo una consulta, quiero que esto sea evidente, que esto sea publicado en una revista, cómo yo presento, quién presenta a nombre de la comunidad los resultados. Eso debe ser no una regla para todos, sino cada espacio, cada comunidad, cada contexto debe determinar cómo será este proceso.
So one of the points of the discussion upon developing the protocol with Renée was precisely what you just asked. So we always include the question, why are we doing this research or this study? Who is going to benefit? What are the results going to be? What are the kind of results we're looking for? So we analyzed this very, very carefully. And we also said, okay, can eventually the community benefit? Because it's the community itself that needs to make the political changes. Then I'm going to ask how, and I will get to that in a moment. And but it can also benefit not only the community, but also the student itself, right? But in the end, the person or people who are going to decide on the how should be the community itself. And that needs to be evident, it needs to be known before the research starts. Who is going to do the research? How will the results be presented? How are they going to be published? Who is going to sign for this? And this should happen not once, but per process, per region, and basically per study every single time.
Gracias. I just want to honor and acknowledge Martin Mayer, who is looking at CAAN and whose responsibility it is to help us to develop and give voice to how to design knowledge translation activities that will be effective to reach our communities. So to look for ways of writing, of artistic expression, of sharing reports. And we actually did a short study, again partnering with ICWA, to begin to ask that question of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, to say, how do you share information in your context? So that Willow from Australia, Pilar is part of that project, many others came together, and we're looking to continue to develop that. So we have no easy answers, And CAAN struggles a great deal because you jump from one project to the next project, and the time to make sure those reports go back and get taken up and translated to policy. I've been asking for money for that now. See how I But I think it's, as Pilar has said, it's something that has to be part of every project.
James, would you like the last
I would
words?
say the power of social media, I think, is really incredible. It's starting to move in to many of our communities, remote Australia. And so, I said briefly, we have 4 Facebook pages. Really, they're simple, they're free to set up. It does take somebody to post messages every day. Really, it's about a research organisation. I pay somebody 8 hours a week to do social media on all of our projects, just to keep the messages going out there, and all of that stuff is based on our research funding. So I think it's, I think that's a simple way. We've got 2 other websites which we kind of post information to. It takes a little bit of money to set up websites, but actually once they're set up, they're very easy to get your research findings out. So I think social media is an important tool that we need to embrace in knowledge translation.
All right, thanks very much for that from our Indigenous panelists from Peru, Australia, and Canada. Thank you very much. And please keep this presentation in mind as we move into the deliberative dialogue, because we've heard examples of best practices, of ethical protocols, and partnerships going forward. So that's why this presentation was delivered now before lunch, and after lunch we'll be going into the deliberative dialogue. We're just lifting our presenters, and please enjoy the lunch that the chef has prepared, and we'll be starting promptly at 1 p.m. Thanks, have a good meal.
Thank you.